everything to everybody. So I don't have a problem if it's not to me high end. Don't want to do it. That's what it is.
So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us here today. I'd like to welcome everybody that's in attendance today, and I'd also like to welcome the over 200 people that are streaming in to watch this panel discussion today. And they're coming from across Canada and from in the United States as well. And I'd like to recognize also some special guests in the room. Honorable Lois Mitchell. We have Sarah Mueller, CEO at the Calgary Public Library, and Hall of Famers Katrina LeMaidon, and as well as Chandra Crawford. So thank you for attending today. On behalf of Canada Sports Hall of Fame and the Public Library, I'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion entitled Truth and Reconciliation Through Sport. Much of today's discussion will speak to how corporations, not-for-profit organizations, sport icons, and community leaders have addressed and continue to address the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples calls to action. We at Canada Sports Hall of Fame have responded to many of the calls to action. Call number 87 specifically connects our organization, and it states, we call upon all levels of government in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples, Sports Hall of Fame, and other relevant organizations to provide public education that tells the national story of Aboriginal athletes in history. Progress has been made in recent years surrounding the education of Indigenous sport history, and Canada Sports Hall of Fame is very proud to play our part. On August 9th, 2021, in honor of International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, with the support of our 14 Indigenous Hall of Famers, our presenting sponsor, Black Diamond Group, Enbridge, and many others, we launched the Indigenous Sport Heroes Education Experience. It shares the stories of the Indigenous Hall of Famers that have been inducted into Canada Sports Hall of Fame, and is arguably one of the most important projects our organization has been involved with to date. It is with this background that our panel today will respond to their involvement and contributions to truth and reconciliation through the lens of sport. At this time, I would like to call upon the moderator of this panel discussion, Paul Karchut.
Hi there. Great to see you all. Yes, I'm Paul Karchut. I'm with CBC Radio, and we're here today to dig into some big topics: sport and reconciliation, corporate involvement in that, and let's welcome our panelists, please. Yes, a round of applause. Okay, so we have 6 panelists with us, a stacked panel, and I'll introduce them for you here. Starting out with Alwyn Morris. Alwyn, you've already seen today, if you've been taking part in some of the other events that have happened through the day, widely considered to be one of the most important Indigenous athletes of all time. He's from the community of Ganawage. He spent 13 years on the national canoe team, and to this day is the only Canadian Indigenous athlete to win a Summer Olympic gold medal, which I think deserves a round of applause. And to this day, after he competed, he went on to establish the Indigenous Sports Circle to help encourage sport development within Indigenous communities, and is both in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame and the North American Indigenous Sports Hall of Fame. Next up, we have another multi-award-winning Hall of Famer here, Saskatchewan-based Indigenous basketball pioneer, Michael Linklater. Michael is from the Thunderchild First Nation, where he first got his hands on a basketball as a kid. Never really looked back from there, helping win the first ever national championship for both the University of Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Rattlers. And he also played for the Canadian national team at the 3x3 or 3x3 World Cup. And since hanging up his high tops, his Air Jordans, Michael has become a tireless advocate for both sport within Indigenous communities and beyond, not to mention his work as a keynote speaker, so I'm sure you'll have a few things to say. Comfortable behind a microphone. And then next up is someone that we'll be seeing a lot of in the coming month, Alayiah Wolfchild, the 2023 Stampede First Nations Princess. She's a member of the Siksika First Nation, and beyond well, her busy schedule with Stampede appearances, as if that's not enough, Alayiah also works with the SN7 group on Siksika, which is founded in part by Nike and is meant to foster a love of sport and athletics within Indigenous youth. And of course, that's a lot of what we're going to get into here today: corporate partnerships. And so to talk about some of the corporate partners here, Trevor Haynes is the chairman and CEO at the Black Diamond Group, and which specializes in modular temporary buildings. You might have seen one outside on your way in here, often used by Alberta's resource industry. The company is involved in a lot of different ways to increase access to sport in First Nations community. It's also a major sponsor for today's event. Rhonda Rudnitski also joins us. She's the Vice President of Environment, Social, and Government at Secure Energy, which is also a sponsor today. And then rounding things off here, Bob Rooney is Executive Vice President at Enbridge by day, volunteers as Chair of Canada's Sports Hall of Fame by night. Like you need a cape or something, Bob. And which, of course, is behind the whole conversation that's happening up here today. So I told you, stacked panel. Please welcome them. We only have 3 microphones, so you'll have to share amongst the 3 of you. Michael and Alwyn, I'm going to start off with you, so pick up a microphone, if you will. 4 microphones. Look at that. Before we kind of get to the corporate side of things here, I want to go big and have you talk about your, the connection that you've had to sport, how it's connected you to your Indigenous roots, how it's allowed you to see your full potential. What role did sport play in your lives? Alwyn?
Great guys. Boy, that's a long question. I mean, I think the best way for me to explain where I come from is that I was raised by my grandparents. And I think that really set me in the proper direction. And I say that not because they were disciplinarians that had me on a short leash. It was more about them just being able to communicate with me and teach me some morality and teach me about what I needed to do in order to be successful. And I think I just lived with those words of encouragement and direction. The reference point from a traditional standpoint is that my role is that of the Turtle Clan, and the Turtle Clan is something called the Turtle Clan's role in our community traditionally is somebody called the helper. So it was pretty easy to make some connections for what my role was in terms of as an athlete, but more importantly as a post athlete. It became just a common thread for me to follow, and I'm pleased that I was able to do that and have the support of many people around me to make some changes and get into the doors that were very shut at the time. What I mean by that is that we were welcomed, or I was welcomed into from the Prime Minister's office to the Minister of Sports offices because I had won the Olympics. But I think that was sort of the stepping stone from my perspective, because again, Indigenous people played such a small role within mainstream sport at the time that it almost was non-existent. And I said to the young group that was here earlier was that, I wasn't the most talented Aboriginal or Indigenous athlete of the time. What I learned from my grandparents and then what I learned from people around me was that hard work brings results. And you have to have a mental strength that will get you through all the things that come to you as a barrier. So I think that's probably the best way I can explain it, is just it became just a natural evolution.
You started or helped establish the Indigenous Sports Circle in the 80s, as we mentioned off the top there. What was the reason why you felt like that was an important organization to get started and use that sort of, those doors that were open because of your gold medal to get it going?
I think, look, I was the only Indigenous athlete in the 1984 Olympic Games. I wasn't the most talented athlete, but I was able to get through things and achieve. Why? Ask yourself why. And it became obvious over a few months that I was going to different Indigenous communities is that there were tons of sport leaders out there. But there was no way and no system in place that would provide an opportunity for them to engage with mainstream sport and their communities. So it became almost obvious we need to build something in this country that has representation from every province or territory in this country to make sure that you had a representative base that dealt with community and was able to move forward on a regional level of the needs of the communities. And that message was learned and it was listened to. And at the time, the federal government opened its doors through Sport Canada and said, all right, we'll give you a small grant for a meeting to bring in the sport leaders from all the Indigenous communities or regions and to start to facilitate the development of some kind of structural piece. I was always sort of an advocate of sustainability, and there was no way we were going to be able to move to establish this grassroots movement unless we were structurally developed. And that's what we did. And then from there, we just kept building the bridges between not only mainstream sport, but more importantly, with the communities at large, because that's where all these kids were coming from. So it was not an easy road by any stretch of the imagination, because this was a time of the Dublin inquiry, and there was standing committees, and there was everything that was going on out there, let alone us trying to kick the door down to establish a structure in this country. And that was one part. And then the other challenge was, how do you convince provincial governments that they have a role to play in helping to establish these structures? And another door opened, and we were able to go to a minister's meeting and say, you as the provincial leaders have an opportunity, not a responsibility, but an opportunity to get in at the beginning levels of developing something that's going to work in creating opportunities for Indigenous athletes, and will be able to move along a path that will ultimately, at the end of the day, will help you. So that's what we did.
You had doors opened for you as a result of, your time in athletics, and then you opened a lot of doors as a result as well. Michael, if you can talk a bit about your sporting career, how it has connected you to your Indigenous culture all the more. What do you want to touch on there?
Ano gumagantik tatamska tinawao tapoy miwasan huwapim tuaw huwab maingan nisigasun huwa kaptigo hostenia muichesqua nenehewan magakitea euxkinamo chikenehewan kapixquewin nista hagamo memo kinanas kumitnan kahkio. And that's all I have to say about that. I'm kidding. So I was very fortunate to have a very illustrious basketball career, and very similar. I stand on the shoulders of my grandparents. My grandparents were products of the residential school system, and my mother was a part of the 60s Scoop. And my mother was taken when she was 12, and if it wasn't for my great aunt who was searching for my mother for several years, she wouldn't have found me. And she found my mother right before she was going to give me up for adoption, before she gave birth to me. And so when my great aunt found my mother, she said, come back to Canada, because she ended up getting adopted to Trenton, New Jersey. And so that's where I was born because of the 60s Scoop. So also being a product of that system, my mother really struggled with addictions. And my grandparents, my great aunt, and her late husband, so Maria and Walter Linklater, that's who I call mom and dad. To this day, my mother still struggles with addictions, and I don't know who my biological father is. One of the interesting things about my upbringing, being raised by my grandparents, was that they went through their trauma through residential school and their healing journey. And they understood the importance of getting back to their culture, which my late father used to say it was a traditional and an inherent right for us to practice our way of life. And a quick reminder for the audience, up until 1951, to one of the last amendments to the Indian Act, our people weren't allowed to practice their culture, their ceremonies. We weren't even allowed to gather in more than groups of 3. So some of your friends, neighbors, maybe in some of you who were complaining through the pandemic that you couldn't gather, it was law for us where our people couldn't gather. So my grandparents understood the importance of getting back to their culture and their identity, which was stripped from them. And I was so fortunate and blessed to be brought up from before I could walk or talk, going into ceremony. So for me, it wasn't what sport did for me in culture, it's what I was able to do in terms of carrying my culture into sport. And so when I got into sport, I was one of the only Indigenous kids who was, excelling in my sport at that time. And so I was becoming I'll say the bridge, but I was breaking down the stereotypes, because in Saskatoon, which is where I live, and it's where I grew up since I was 10 years old, I grew up hearing the term, all Indians are drunks. And for me, it was difficult because I couldn't defend myself, because both of my biological grandparents died of alcoholism. My mother, like I said, to this day still struggles with alcoholism. And all of my family who I was aware of, had their bouts with addictions. And so when I was in grade 6, I made the decision to abstain from drugs and alcohol because I wanted to one day represent Canada at the highest level, playing the sport I loved. And I realized, looking at some of my extended family, that if I wanted to go down this road of being an elite athlete, I needed to abstain from drugs and alcohol. So to this day, I'm 40 years old, and not once have I ever tasted a drop of alcohol or experimented with any type of drug. And what's really interesting about that is I'm first generation sober in my family. And so for some of you, alcohol has been a part of your family for generations. Our people have struggled with alcoholism and addiction since the day it's come to this continent. So I realized at a young age that that was never a way of our people historically. We had our ceremony, we had our traditions, and I was so fortunate to be brought up with that. So when I was in locker rooms, people would ask these questions. And so I was actually a living stereotype breaker, because those questions would be presented to me in the locker rooms and sharing that. And so my story, us being generations apart are very similar. And a lot of the work that I've been doing now, there's an exciting announcement I think that will be made next week with Canada Basketball that I've been working hard with for quite a few years to make something happen. But it is for that next generation, because you hear the saying that representation matters, and it really does. Because for us, for a lot of you who are colonial settlers, you get to see your image, your skin color on all kinds of advertisements in different places. For us, we don't see that as often. And, so this day is a day of celebration, but it's also a day to recognize the contributions and the struggles that our ancestors went through. And so recognizing what my grandparents went through, we are here because of them. So again, one thing I would like to do is thank all of you for attending here today, because there's some important information that we have to share with you. And so for you being here today, you're doing your part in reconciliation. So I want to thank you all for being here.
Michael, you talk about how you felt as though you were a stereotype breaker in the locker room, on the court as well, I imagine, to a degree. Like, how did you see that as an opportunity? Did you see it as exhausting? What was it like for you to be put into that role, maybe unknowingly?
I was inspired by my grandparents. Like, growing up and seeing, they were doing the work of reconciliation before it was even talked about. A lot of the work that they did was helping people find their cultural identity. Because, when you actually think about it, the fact that we get to practice our ceremony and culture today is not only a blessing, but in a way it's a bit of a miracle. Because remember, those ceremonies were outlawed. So if you were ever caught practicing ceremony, you were getting taken to jail. So during the residential school era, we had a lot of our ceremonial keepers have to hide and practice ceremony, in secrecy. So that because they understood the importance of us having our culture today and what it was going to do for us. So now you see the revitalization of our cultures for these younger generations that are really embracing it. And having my parents, my grandparents inspire me, I remember them getting phone calls, at 3 o'clock in the morning from City Hospital saying that, there's somebody here who doesn't have family and, they're about to start their journey to the spirit world and they want somebody to come and pray for them. My mom would wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, no questions asked, no dollars involved, nothing. She would wake up, she would take her medicine bundle, and she would go and pray. And so I got a chance to hear him chat earlier, and he was talking about being a helper. And so in our language, we call it a waskapeos. Now, waskapeos is an elder's helper that helps with those ceremonies and with those teachings. And then, when the time comes, they move into that role of those ceremony keepers. So seeing my grandparents and the work that they did inspired me to continue on, which I mean in colonial context would be considered like a family business. But it's not a business for us, it's a continuation of culture that's been here since time immemorial. So being in those locker rooms, I seen it as an opportunity to help educate my friends. Because again, me growing up hearing what I heard, it was the same things my friends were hearing. So when I had those opportunities to share with them, I knew that they would be in some conversations in rooms that I wasn't going to be in, where they could help to, advocate on behalf of us. So again, for the information and the teachings that you're hearing today, when you're in some of those rooms where, we're not in, you have that opportunity to share some of these teachings that we're sharing with you today, to help break down some of those stereotypes, to be an ally, to be an advocate for us. And it's really important. So I didn't necessarily take it as a job. It was almost like an obligation or a responsibility. Because when you think about what all the residential school survivors had gone through, it really is our responsibility to contribute in the best way we know how.
Alayiah, do you have a microphone in your hand? Excellent. I think it's turned on already. I think you're good. How many events do you have? Right, are you just bouncing around from a million things heading up toward the Stampede here?
I don't think Hello, everyone. I'm a little bit nervous. This is my first panel, so bear with me.
You've got this.
Yeah, there's a lot of events leading up to Stampede. I think I counted 17 or 16 days until the big parade day. So I'm a little excitedly nervous for that.
And you've got a ton on the go, so it's good to have you here. You're, aside from your role with the Stampede, doing a lot of work with the SN7 group. Tell us about it. What is its mission?
So SN7 is a youth mentorship program out in Siksika Nation, and a lot of my coworkers are facilitated in programs that are geared towards sports. And so we have lacrosse, basketball, baseball, and all these programs are to kind of inspire the youth of today or the next generation. Because of a lot of our youth kind of undergo intergenerational trauma, and they suffer from that social anxiety, all depression and addiction. So we're trying to lead them in a right direction so that they have the whole world to explore. Because I'm a traveler myself, and the last couple of years I went to, pre-pandemic, I went to, I think it was Greece, and oftentimes I would get mistaken as different cultures or different ethnicities, and I would correct them and tell them, oh, I'm Indigenous. This is who I am. I come from Turtle Island, and I'm proud to be here. And I would often get the same words, oh, I thought you guys were extinct. I thought you guys were no longer here. And, that broke my heart in those times. And I struggle with social anxiety, and hearing those words just drove me to inspire my younger siblings and the youth of my own nation to be proud of who they are, to wear all their regalia, to even learn new beadwork or skills, because I'm the cultural side of that. And kind of going off topic right now.
It's okay. What kind of sports are also part of the SN7 group?
So one of my other coworkers he just learned the Indigenous games, and we're bringing that out into like the different schools throughout the reserve. And I totally forget what games he has because I haven't been around lately. But when he was doing the training process, I was back home during that time, and I learned one of the games. It's like with a stick, and I think it had like a sack on it. And I was trying to call my mom at the time. I'm very proud of the story, sorry. So I had the stick in my hand, and I'm really competitive when it comes to games. And I was trying to call my mom, and I just quickly grabbed it, put my Crocs in sport mode, and I ended up scoring, and I was just like, oh yeah, hello, Mom. So that was really fun learning the traditional games when I had the chance, and those are the types of programs that SN7 offers out in our reserve. And we have gone off reserve, like to the wheatland communities in Strathmore. I've taught a Blackfoot class with the Wheatland Crossing, and I told them all about the creation stories, how powwow dancing is a sport of some sort, because when I dance my jingle dress, I am winded. I gotta keep my stamina up when I dance, and a lot of the powwow dances are very hard to do, especially the men's fancy or the women's fancy, because that requires a lot of stamina. And I'm very proud of my younger siblings for pursuing fancy dance and jingle, because it's a lot on the legs.
Extremely athletic, absolutely. I didn't realize that Crocs had an athletic mode.
Oh yeah. So anyone who has Crocs, just put the strap to the back and you're ready to go play any sport. You can play football, basketball.
The power strap.
Almost better than moccasins. Almost, not quite.
Can you tell us, I mean, whether it's, going down the part of the SN7 group that you work with, which is through it sounds like crafts and traditional art, or sport for that matter. What are some of the stories of success, or some of those just sort of magic moments that you've seen among youth who are taking part in these programs?
So pre-pandemic, again, one of my students, this was when I was first brought on to SN7. I was asked to help teach make ribbon skirts. And at that time, I was still kind of learning how to make ribbon skirts. I was still like adapting, dissecting every skirt that I came across, looking at it. And so anyways, I participated with that. I ended up meeting families because it was a mother-daughter event, and they came back throughout the month, and we just kind of talked over tea, talked over our mistakes on the dresses, and then continued on. And, the pandemic happened, and we were all at home doing our own thing. And I didn't realize until we were asked again to teach a Blackfoot Fine Arts class at the Sixth Nation High School. And I was talking with one of the students, and I didn't realize who she was at the time. And she so happened to be one of the students that I taught pre-pandemic. And she's like, oh, do you remember me? And of course, I had my contacts in. I was like, wait, you grew up. And so she had to boggle my brain, and I finally realized who she was. And so she brought that skirt in the next day, and I was like, oh, I remember you. And so we ended up growing a friendship that entire semester. And right before Christmas, she was telling me that she wanted to get more involved with our activities as beadwork, because we provided beadwork, necklaces, belts, ribbon skirts, and we always try to pass down our knowledge down to the next generation, because I don't have kids. I mean, I have my fur baby, but I don't think he's gonna learn how to sew anytime soon. So I think after Christmas Day, she messaged me and she's like, "Oh, I got a sewing machine. Can you teach me?" I was like, "Of course." So every once in a while, she comes into a problem with her beadwork or her sewing machine, and I'm just like, "Oh, just do this and it should be fine. Just hit the machine and you're good to go." So I'm really proud of my particular student who kind of went out of her way to learn and to kind of learn more about it. And I'm really hope that we bring her on to our SN7 crew, because that'd be really neat for the next generation to kind of teach their next generation.
Wonderful. Bob, let's talk about something that Cheryl had talked about off the top there a little bit, the Indigenous Sports Heroes Education Experience. Can you explain a bit more about what it is and why it was something that was so important for the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame to get going?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And actually, this is a real privilege for me to be sitting on this panel and appearing with all you distinguished people. For a guy that just works downtown and puts a suit on, this is a real privilege for me. Cheryl gave a pretty good description of that at the outset. We started it in 2021 in recognition of the international recognition of Indigenous peoples. And it has really taken off, and it was done with the help of our Indigenous Hall of Famers, and Alwyn's one of them, and with others that have really leaned in to shape the program. It's got 14 Indigenous languages part of it. And so far, after 2 years, we've had over 1 million hits on the website, which is fantastic. That's the power of digital, so we're very proud of that. And I would like to thank my colleagues at the Hall, Cheryl, who's an all-star CEO, who is the real driving force behind all of this. And Misty and Janice and Ruth are here somewhere. They've done just an outstanding job of getting this project up and running. And it wasn't without a huge amount of support from Trevor and his organization. And Trevor and I served together on the board of the Sports Hall of Fame, which is a great national organization. It's a privilege to sit on that board and work with the great people we've got, both at the Hall and then the board, which is quite representative across Canada. So we're very proud of where that goes. It's part of our overall education program at the Hall. And it really is reaching across Canada into a number of classrooms, particularly Indigenous classrooms that otherwise would not have had the opportunity to be exposed to that. And, you know, Michael talked about having role models, and Alwyn, you were one of the very first role models for Indigenous sport in Canada. And the importance of it, it's, I think in my simple words, it's if you can see it, you can be it. And so we really want people to see it. And I think one of the coolest things this year was Stanley Cup Finals, first time in history, 2 Indigenous players performing as well as anyone in the Stanley Cup Final, one on each team. And it was Zach Whitecloud with Vegas, and he got to hold the cup, and I hope he really gets to take the cup back to the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. I know it was a huge deal there, and talk about a role model for just across Canada, quite frankly. And Brendan Montour, who was playing for Florida and was an outstanding player as well. So very cool that that's the first time in history, and I think that's because of role models like you guys. You've shown them how to do it, and so they're following in your footsteps. I know they looked up to Jordan Tutu and said, that guy opened a bunch of doors for us, and we got to follow him through those doors. He did the hard work, and I think before him, a guy like Brian Trottier. At the Hall, we're all about telling stories, the power of stories. At any rate, Brian Trottier grows up, he learns to play hockey on a beaver pond, a beaver dam. His dad would break the dam open to flood the rink so he'd have smooth ice to skate on. He goes on to win 6 Stanley Cups as a player, 1 as a coach, and he wins every single major trophy in the NHL. One of 3 players in history to do that. It's absolutely phenomenal. Can you imagine how many great athletes we would come out of our Indigenous and First Nations if they had access to the facilities that most of us enjoy, and most of them don't? It would be unbelievable. And that's where we cross over on the corporate side to be able to start doing co-investment and real reconciliation, which is a long journey. But that's where we cross over, where putting on my Enbridge hat now, we recently did a transaction up in Athabasca with 23 First Nations and Métis communities, where we were able to structure a financing, and they bought an 11%, 11.57 to be accurate, probably precisely wrong, but generally accurate, for well over $1.1 billion. And that is going to change the lives of many people in that region, and it's going to give them economic sovereignty for 7 generations, which I think is the way, I love the way we think in 7 generations. And they're going to be able to build facilities that so far they've not been able to do, and I think that's fantastic. Anyway, long answer, Paul.
It's great. It's great. We've got the time. Trevor, your role is at a personal level with the board, as Bob had talked about there. It's also on a corporate level with the Black Diamond Group. Last year on this panel, we had somebody else from the Black Diamond Group on this panel, and we're talking about the number of ways in which your company has tried to build facilities, as Bob was talking about there, give opportunities to Indigenous youth and Indigenous athletes. Can you give us some examples again, and just explain why that's an important piece of your sort of corporate culture?
Thanks, Paul. Well, as Black Diamond, we're very honored to be included and to be able to participate, and it's always great to be around some truly exceptional people. And I love the stories, and we love the stories from perspective of the Canada Sports Hall of Fame. To give a little bit of context around Black Diamond, so we mentioned modular buildings, but that's a very simplistic view of what we do. Collectively as a company, we've got the expertise of solving problems with regard to how do we take a large group of people into an area that lacks infrastructure, create that infrastructure for life support in terms of living accommodation, but also workspace, et cetera. How do we deal with generating power, water, handling waste, and then taking it all away afterwards so that we can support great customers like Enbridge. And that seemed to me, when we started the company, complicated enough, but then our customers started asking something different, which is, you're at the field level, is there a way that you can connect with the local communities, the Indigenous communities, to find ways that we can provide additional benefit, financial, but also employment and skills development, et cetera. And this is something I'd never been involved in. And as we started to look at this question and whether or not we could solve that problem in addition to the others that we traditionally had done for our customers, the question was, what does a great engagement, what does a great partnership look like? How do we build the connectivity that informs trust, which is the basis of any partnership? And we came up with some interesting models, working first with the Fort Nelson First Nation, Dene Nation, and looking at how we can truly inform sustainability on a financial level in ownership around assets and projects, but also how do we build a connection with the community? And this is something that we felt very strongly about and that we needed to spend time as a team from Black Diamond within the community. This particular community was, they had built and developed an elementary school called the Challow School, if anybody's been there, an exceptional education program. And the chief at the time, Kathy Dickey, had been the principal of the school. And so we wanted to connect around the school. That was important to the community. Asked some friends, Lanny McDonald and Jim Poplinski, if they would come up with us to the community and have a day of inspiration. Danielle Goyette was on the trip with us as well. And we were going to play a game of hockey in the local rink. They've since built a gorgeous community center, but at that time it was a fairly small rink. And what I realized as we were in circle time with the athletes and the kids and passing around the Olympic medals and the Stanley Cup rings and just the engagement of the kids and how interested they were in the stories. And you could almost see ideas forming or dreams forming of potential of what could happen. And I think for me, personally, that was sort of the first realization that there's this real connection between sports and exceptional people who've achieved in sports and that engagement and the ability to inspire. And so we started building around that. We would bring youth from many of our communities that we developed these business partnerships with into Calgary for a day of inspiration with the Canada Sports Hall of Fame up at Winsport, et cetera, and continuing to build our program. It's been great for our team, this connectivity and increasing learning about the challenges and some of the really cool things about these communities and their traditions, et cetera. And from that, we've continued to build our programs, and when I was asked to serve as a governor of Hall of Fame, I had a clear idea of what I thought we needed to do in that institution, and that is to create this platform where our sports heroes can interact and effectively interact, provide inspiration and education. So you bring it all together to where we are today as Black Diamond Group and playing a meaningful role and not just sponsoring, but actively our team members and interacting. The business models that we put together with joint ownership have survived the test of time, and we've got some fantastic friendships that have built out of it. And we're still continuing to be interested in how we develop this, and that's where when Cheryl and her team and Janice came up with the idea of Indigenous Sports Heroes Education experience, it just immediately was obvious it fit into our view from Black Diamond Group of where that intersection between business and youth and sports and exceptionalism in sports came together. And so we were very happy to be a core sponsor. So that's a very long, I'm very good at long answers to short questions, but just to give the context of what it means for Black Diamond, why we continue to play a role here, and why I think it's very meaningful with regard to reconciliation, with regard to building trust and partnership and moving our youth forward. So thank you again.
Thank you. Rhonda, we're talking about sport as a part of reconciliation here a bit today. And, you know, reconciliation at an individual level is a very different thing to reconciliation at a corporate level. What is corporate reconciliation in your mind? And how have you gone about thinking about that at Secure Energy?
All right, so first of all, thanks for inviting me. Privileged to be here. I'm very honored to be representing Secure in this context. I think that for Secure, we're a fairly young and new company, but one of the kind of components or pillars of our business is really, because we're in a lot of remote communities, to be tied to the people in the communities that we're with. So Indigenous relations and partnerships and being able to find true meaningful relationships with our Indigenous communities has always been key to our business, and it's certainly contributed to our success. So we're very thankful for that. And then our CEO really believes in youth development and sports all over, across the board, and he considers it one of our pillars to our company. So whenever we can invest in sports and youth development, we will. And so this is a great opportunity for us because we actually get to marry two things that are important to us. And we really are trying hard to work at truth and reconciliation because that's really key to part of our corporate DNA. So this was a great opportunity for us to do that. And first of all, I'll talk about sports and why we feel as a company sports are so important. We've heard through the great stories and conversation that we've had up to this point how sports has helped people overcome some really challenging things. And I think sports gives you lots of things, and whether it's individual sports or team sports, it teaches you how to think. It really opens up your mind to diversity. We heard the story about the locker room and how it broke stereotypes, and that's so powerful because when we're all real and we're all ourselves together in a locker room or on a playing field or even on a playground for that matter, because I'm more of the playground kind of athlete, not the Olympic caliber athlete that you have over there. I think it's really, really important because people just become people, and it's really the first step to reconciliation, is recognizing that we'll always be different, but that difference and that diversity is what makes Canada strong, and it's what's going to help us build a future for a true and meaningful Canada. So for us, that's really important. I think we learn a lot from sports. It teaches you survival, it teaches you accountability, it teaches you how to work with people. It even gives you communication skills that are so important, both as being part of a team, but also being a leader. And our CEO thinks that sports are so important when you're in your youth and developing years, because that's really where you start to formulate some of the things and values that you take into your future. And youth is important because youth is what's going to support this country in the future. It's who's going to take us into the next 7 generations. So it's important for us to build strong youth that are talented, that understand diversity, and that can work together. So for us, that's an important part of reconciliation because it's how we're going to move forward at this point in time. And I can tell you that we even integrate sports into our corporate office. So we have 2 sports days a year, and everybody in the corporate office is expected to participate no matter their level or quality. And I can say, like, I'm the kid that was on the bench in gym all the time because nobody wanted me on their team. So for me, that's exceptionally hard. But at the end of every one of those days, I come out of it and I go, I'm not an emergency, so this is a good thing. And actually, you know what? I had a pretty good day. And I've learned to work with people or met people in the company that I wouldn't otherwise have met. So it just makes us stronger as a company. And I think through sport, we can make the country stronger and really support the calls to action and support truth and reconciliation.
What was the one event that you just nailed it?
Never nailed it ever. Like maybe if I was allowed to be the scorekeeper, I could say that's when I would nail it.
Expert scorekeeping. Yeah. That's great. Alwyn, we hear about these examples of corporate sponsorship and partnership. What is the right way, whether we're talking about sport or beyond, of having a proper, meaningful corporate partnership within an Indigenous community?
It's a good question. And you know what? I'm very impressed with our 3 corporate people here. One of the things that I ran into, and this is, to me, really interesting, is that when the corporate community as a whole, and I'll talk about this in sort of previous to the reconciliation and the calls to action, it was always what I want to do for you. And it was never about what can we do together. That's changing. And one of the things that we struggled with, and I say that the royal we, the indigenous community as a whole, was that corporate just thinking was, we're going to go and look like good corporate people, and we're going to bring this to this group of people. And that happened so often, and what it did, it set expectations. And then that corporate group left almost immediately. And all the people and all the good that they were planning to do was lost. And what does that do? You set expectations and then you kill them. And it's those one-offs that government was working from the perspective, corporate wanting to do something was working from that perspective, and it was never about what can we do together to make a difference? And I'm really happy to hear things are slowly changing, but I think that's really the key. It's not about a one-way street. Reconciliation is about people coming together and making things better for everyone. And that means the corporate community and the Indigenous community in this day and age.
Michael, we hear about, examples where it can be truly effective as a partnership, corporations, Indigenous communities. There are also examples of times where corporations can be, criticized for, well, ticking a box, writing a check and then heading out the door. And it can come across as disingenuous. How does a corporation go about ensuring that they are having a real meaningful long-term relationship within an Indigenous community, whether we're talking about sport funding or beyond?
My thoughts on this, I have a lot. And I think one of the teachings that I was given was that there's no such thing as the right way. There's such thing as a good way. So how can we do something in a good way? And that teaching resonates throughout my life because, my right way might be different from your right way. So does that make my way wrong, or does it make your way wrong? So a teaching from the elders that they give us is, we don't necessarily say that or use that. We say, we want to start things off in a good way, or how can we move forward in a good way? And so, it was shared here by our legend. A lot of companies do come in. They want to come in on the white shining horse and say, this is what we're going to do for you. And it's still happening today. One of the things that I like to look at, and I'll give a shameless plug for my company here, Sakisawin Solutions. What we do is we help non-Indigenous organizations strategically answer calls to action. What I've found that has come about after TRC and the graves coming to the forefront is that a lot of organizations want to do something, and there's a lot of Indigenous engagement and training that happens. But after that training happens, it's like, well, now what? And a lot of organizations are stuck, frozen in place because they don't want to mess up. And they're so fearful of messing up that nothing's being done. So one of the things that I always love to share with people is that we have our greatest learning opportunities throughout our life when we've made mistakes. And as long as you're doing something in a good way with good intention, it's okay to mess up. And so when you start off in that journey, you think about the term that's been mentioned, and it's been a teaching of ours since time immemorial, is thinking about the generations to come. And so one of the sayings that I live by that an elder shared was that we don't inherit the land from our parents, but we're borrowing it from our children. So what are we doing today that is going to serve those generations that are coming? And it's almost become cliche in terms of, the next generation, future leaders, all this, yada, yada, yada. We say it so often. But really, what are we doing to make a generational impact? And so when you have a company that has the resources, and I challenge you, Enbridge, you're not just a guy, in a suit that sits in an office. You have the ability to make some really big decisions that can have a profound impact as you're doing. So don't discredit yourself. And it's so important because, there's not too many people that look like me sitting beside you in those offices, but we need to get there. And so how relating that to sport is I was very fortunate to hear the commissioner for the WNBA speak a couple weeks ago in Toronto. And she mentioned that when she was CEO of one of the Fortune 500 companies at that time, there was only 5 other females that were CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And what she shared that they all had in common was that they played team sports. Now, so a lot of our communities struggle, as mentioned earlier, with intergenerational trauma. And so we have a lot of work to do, but we're still undermined by the federal government. So if the private sector can step in and make those contributions, what we can do is create generational impact. And one of the ways that I'm so fortunate to be a part of, I served on leadership for one term for my First Nation. And the leadership prior to us had an agreement with an oil company. And there was a whole situation that happened, but they ended up righting their wrong. And so they made a contribution to our First Nation for $6 million. And that $6 million gave us the seed money that we needed in order to go to the federal and provincial government for infrastructure dollars. And without those dollars, we wouldn't have been able to access, the total budget was a $24 million wellness facility on our First Nation. And so when we hear about these athletes who are playing at the highest level, they have access to that infrastructure. And I challenged the COC. I was fortunate to speak at one of their conferences where all the NSOs were. And I said, what you just said was that there are Olympic level athletes in all of our communities. But once they get to the point where they need those extra resources, that's where they're falling off. And when they don't have access to those resources in terms of that infrastructure, we're not able to see those Montours or those White Clouds. So when there's communities that have hockey rinks, Bridget Laquette is another one. And so for them to have access to those facilities gives them that opportunity to continue to reach the highest levels. And so when you have athletes or when you have people in general that play sport or have access to sport, they may not play at the highest level, but as what was mentioned earlier, all of the benefits that come from a holistic approach, from the mental, physical, emotional, and even spiritual aspect. So there's so much that, the private sector can do to really help our people, but it's in collaboration, as the legend said himself, as it's coming to the table together collectively. And that's when we have our ceremonies in our circles, we sit collectively, collaboratively, to have those discussions. So there's a lot that corporate can be doing. And again, you being here is a start. So I am really appreciative, and I'll continue to express my gratitude to all of you being here.
Bob, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that. Thanks for the shout out there. That was very kind of you. I was just being self-deprecating. But what Michael, you and Alwyn both said is spot on. I mean, at Enbridge, we've got long linear projects that have 40 and 50-year lifespans across North America. I think we deal with 350 First Nations and federally recognized tribes and bands in the U.S. So we do this every day. And we used to be the guys that would show up and say, here, this is what we're going to do for you, and get our project built and say thanks, see you later. And we've now transitioned to a whole life cycle approach where what we're doing is going to last for 40 or 50 years, day to day. It's not we're there and we're gone. And that's been a big transition for us, and it's been a big learning for us. We've also published what we call our Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan, which has a number of things in it that we say, this is what we're going to try to do. We did that in conjunction with 50 elders from across North America that fed into it to say, these are the types of things you want to do. So we're really trying to listen and learn. And then we publish where we are on each one, because these aren't, an annual goal, but we say, this is what we're going to do. One of them is training and employment numbers. So we have hard targets of employment numbers. So you and I are sitting side by side before too long. And what we've done is we say, okay, we're going to have a summer program that is going to hire across all the disciplines within Enbridge, and there's a lot. And it's solely focused on Indigenous students. And that's how we're going to build the pipeline of the talent, so that, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time, and we have to work together to make it happen. We've recently, on your point, Alwyn, we have just, well, in the last year, we've started from day one. Like the deal I talked about before was existing assets. We started from day one with 4 First Nations, and we're jointly developing the first, it's the most advanced, there's lots of people talking about it, we're actually doing it, carbon capture and sequestration in Wabamun, Alberta, with 4 First Nations as our partners, which works right into a clean energy future and dealing with the energy transition. And that's, I think, the path to reconciliation. It's a journey, it's a long one. And we're very proud of where we are on that, but we've got a long ways to go.
Trevor, it was a question that I asked Rhonda as well, but the difference between individual reconciliation and corporate reconciliation. What is the difference in your opinion, and how do you most effectively achieve it?
Yeah, I haven't really given that thought, but I guess my quick answer would be individual learning and group learning. We've come a long way. So a lot of what you're mentioning is applicable to us. Today, our approach to creating a new partnership with a First Nation has more to do with us saying, we're good partners. Here's our values as partners. We're not going to solve all of your problems, but if helping solve problems is having good, trustworthy partners, then perhaps you would like to consider partnering with us. And we've got a track record now of very successful partnerships. And I think the learning part is the understanding, and perhaps in my definition of reconciliation, it has to do with learning, understanding, becoming familiar, respecting, that there are challenges and we need to work together. There isn't a simple solution or an immediate solution. And I would say for our organization, and engaging our broader group in why are we doing this? Why is this important? What are the positives? And then as each individual has the opportunity, and as many people in our organization as we can, being able to spend time in the communities we're partnered with and making personal connections, learning, I think that's a big part of the individual reconciliation and the group or company reconciliation, if you will. And I think there's an element of being humble and saying, yeah, as a business person, I am wired and trained to solve problems and to show up and solve problems, or to cast everything as I can solve that problem more quickly and more effectively than anybody else. You should hire me. That's essentially what we say as a company, as a service company. But in this regard, it's more saying we're careful to make promises because we're going to keep every promise we make. And the quality of our partnerships is collectively people trusting that everything we said we would do, we would do. And that's the essence of our work, I believe, with our engagement, our partnerships, and the relationships that we've built. And so perhaps in that is sort of our view individually and collectively on reconciliation.
Yeah. I believe we were going to take a break here. Is that right? Great. Let's have a quick break here, and then we'll return to our conversation. Let's just take a few minutes, folks. Just a few minutes. Yes, I know. Yeah. I kept looking over my shoulder going, is she here? Yeah.
Really good conversation.
Yeah, so far so good. Anything that you want to hear more of?
It is always like, I thought what Alwyn said, that it's going to be what can we do together and what good can we do. Those are the two big key pieces I took out of that entire conversation. And you still compete? No.
Yeah.
And we'll fail and we'll get back up and we're good as that.
Perfect.
How long is this break?
Like 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Perfect.
So we're not going far. Yeah, that's no words better said.
No, it's okay.
All right, folks, if you can get back to your seats here. Just a quick leg stretch, but we'll get you to return to your seats here if you don't mind, please. And we'll welcome Cheryl Bernard back to the podium here.
Thank you, everyone. You know, I have to say this panel discussion has been very insightful, and the two takeaways I took from all of it is from Alwyn, what can we do together? And from Michael, what good can we do? And I think for all of us to remember, Alwyn said it to me perfectly, we're never going to get it all right. But if we're going to move down the path to reconciliation, we're going to do our very best, and we're going to hear, and we're going to listen, and we're going to do things together. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you, Her Worship Mayor, Jody Gondek.
Oki, Ambawastich, Dadanastara, Tanse, everyone. Greetings to all of you in the mother languages of the Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land for generations before many of us came to settle here at the confluence of the Bow and Elbow rivers, the land that's called Mokinstis. On behalf of my Calgary City Council colleagues, I'd like to thank the Canada Sports Hall of Fame for inviting me today to truly honor the peoples who protected this land over time, the peoples who have treaty rights over these lands. Our promises towards truth and reconciliation must come from the heart, and they must reflect a commitment to do better into the future. Together with many of you, I am on a journey to fully appreciate the truth about the land on which we have settled, and moving towards a path that includes both reconciliation and action, to hear the stories that have been suppressed, the histories that have never been told, and the voices that were silenced for far too long. So what does that actually mean in the work that we do every day? It means that we have to be very intentional in our progress because status quo is no longer enough. The path forward is going to feel much different than that which we're used to. And that's because we exist in a moment in time where we could be much better at building an inclusive and welcoming society. And I really think we could do this if we actually looked at history, if we looked into Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous ways of justice and ways of healing. If we really did that, we would see that Indigenous communities are rooted in principles and practices of acceptance, of love for one another, of being open to who an individual truly is. There's no hard and fast categorization process within Indigenous communities. They are instead focused on believing that Creator brought us into the world to live with one another, in balance and in harmony with nature. There's also another important part of Indigenous history that needs to be daylighted, and it is a deep tie to sport and competition. In recent years, we've seen more Indigenous communities share traditional sport, like double ball or relay racing on bareback. We've fully embraced lacrosse without fully appreciating the sport's origins and Indigenous roots. This recognition of Indigenous sport is important because it creates a link between tradition and the present. It's a way to ensure that Indigenous athletes are able to express their identity with pride and able to compete both within and outside their nations. In bidding for the North American Indigenous Games over the last few months, I've had the incredible opportunity and privilege of listening to Treaty 7 Indigenous athletes, both past and present, tell their stories. These are stories of love for their chosen sport, about memories of finding people who shared their traditions and culture, and of feeling kinship through sport. We have North American Indigenous Games medal winners who are now leaders in their nations, and youth who are able to see a path forward towards competitive sport that can also assist with things like post-secondary pursuits. Call to action number 91 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report implores us to ensure that Indigenous athletic history and elite sport performance are both profiled and supported. And events like this one today move us forward in a good way. Let's ensure that we maintain that focus towards moving forward in a good way, knowing that we're emboldening generations to come to be strong and to be engaged. Let's be bold together in the legacy that we wish to build. Let us be intentional in our desire to have good relations and to also be good relations. I'll leave you today with appreciation for the work that the Canada Sports Hall of Fame is doing towards reconciliation, and with love in my heart for the understanding that National Indigenous Peoples Day is a moment to recognize the work that we must do. It is not an isolated day of action. Every day is an opportunity to learn more and make meaningful strides towards inclusion in sport and in society. Thank you for having me, and I wish you well in the conversations you're about to have.
Thank you, Mayor Gondek. And welcome back to our panel conversation here on sport and reconciliation. We'll jump right back into things. Alayiah, I'm wondering, we hear about the importance of corporate partnership in so many of these programs that are being discussed today. The SN7 group that you're a part of gets funding from Nike. What do you think the best means of that kind of partnership looks like? I mean, is it best to have a check written and to leave it to the community, to the SN7 group, to make the most of what they can with that funding? Do you want to see direct involvement from that corporation? What does that look like to you?
Hello. Okay, just making sure. I think it would be quite interesting to see the Enbridge play some Indigenous games in their Crocs. No. But I think the involvement with our programs to see how we're guiding our youth to kind of succeed in their own way, to see where, from an Indigenous perspective, to see how everything's affected us, especially with residential schools, intergenerational trauma. And yesterday I had the privilege of going to one of the Enbridge events yesterday, and one of the Indigenous people from Tsuut'ina Nation was saying that he never heard the term "I love you" from his parents until he was the age of 25 years old. And that is a struggle that us Indigenous people have always gone through. We don't know how to kind of appreciate that affection, and I struggle with that from nowadays. And it's not that my family has not shown that love and compassion towards me. It's just I think I was taught, or I've always seen, to be tough and to have that tough skin, and I've never understood how to have that tough skin, and it's always been difficult. But for corporations to come out to the reserve and see all our Indigenous games, or especially the relay races, that's something to see how they train, because one of my coworkers is a part of the relay races this year. Her name's Logan Redcrow, and she's also an SN7 worker, and she's done programs to help the next generation learn how to ride horses, how to get them ready and all that, and kind of just watching how she does that. It's different from my world because I'm a creator, and I don't know how to jump on a horse with my Crocs on or anything like that. So it's different. It's definitely an eye-opener to see all these programs and which way they lead. Because my coworkers are very skilled, like lacrosse, and they're even learning how to make the traditional lacrosse stick. I can't play that. It's too difficult for me. I'm not good in my sport mode there.
You need a Croc sponsorship is what you need. Get Nike and Croc on board with your program. Rhonda, we hear there about the finding that balance, right, between funding but also involvement within a community. How has Secure Energy found the way to walk that line with the way that you go about supporting the remote communities that you do?
So I think that what we kind of alluded to earlier in our discussion was it really has to be a partnership. We found that our greatest successes have been when both sides come to the table, get to know each other, kind of have a bit of a relationship first, and then really work through and understand, like put each other in each other's shoes so that we kind of understand the one side of the table and the other side of the table understands ours. And then the key is really working together to those common goals and understanding that there's going to be success and failure, because I think everybody can really rally around failure, but tying this back to sport too, when you lose, sometimes you get better because you lose, because you learn from your mistakes. And I think that one of the things we've been successful with around the table is really building on not just success, but learning from the failure as well and just getting better each time. But I think the most important part is that open, transparent communication so that your partnership is real. And I think that that's how we've been successful so far.
Michael, one of the things that you were talking about earlier was this idea of giving to the next generation, setting them up for success, thinking of the next generation when you're on a project that you're working on. And that's exactly what you're doing right now with Powate Done and this court project that you're working on, which is very close to complete. Tell people about what it is, and you're lighting up here. You're passionate about it. Tell us about what it is and what you're trying to achieve with it.
I'm really excited about this project that is near completion. So, I picked up the basketball by coming out in recess. I went to an inner-city school in Saskatoon, poverty-stricken community, lots of addictions and all kinds of stuff. And when I came out for recess one day, there was a brand new court that was just paved. And so all the kids in the schoolyard surrounded this basketball court, and it inspired me to want to play. And I was just, it was like this big atmosphere, like it was like a stadium to me. So I came out and saw that, wanted to play. And so looking back on my life, now that I'm done playing competitively, I was like, how can I start to replicate some of these things that were really integral parts of my life that, encouraged me to continue on my journey? And so how I started was a basketball court. And so Saskatoon does not have a good basketball court. They're all just kind of your backyard, schoolyard courts. And so I set out on this journey where I said, I'm going to get a basketball court, and it's going to be the best one in Canada. It's going to be outdoor. It's going to be accessible to everybody. So we had to go to the city of Saskatoon, and going to the city and asking, can we borrow some land to build infrastructure for you? That's a foreign thing to city and administrators. So they had to kind of come up with this process to say, how are we going to do this? So as we were working through this process, and no pun intended, jumping through a lot of hoops, there was, this process that we were able to kind of create. And so through this process, for me, I knew, and again, taking words, if you can see it in your mind, it can become a reality. And so for me, I said, this court is going to get built. And so what we did is, while we were working through this, no dollars, nothing, just the vision to make this happen. City Council, we wanted this land. It was right on the riverbank, phase 2 of River Landing. Beautiful, beautiful location. And I was thinking about not only my community that I grew up in, which is, right on the borders of where this court is, so it's going to be in walking distance to a lot of those kids. But I was also thinking about tourism and bringing people to Saskatoon. So there's famous courts in New York, Rucker Park. There's also one in Venice Beach, and there's also one in Vancouver called Kitts Beach. And so these basketball courts are located in a location that is well lit, it's very safe. And I wanted that to be built to inspire that next generation in terms of what it helped me. So Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities got wind of what we were doing, and they reached out and said, we want to be a part of this. And they didn't come in and say, this is what we want to do. They said, how can we help? And so we don't want to come in and take this project, because Jumpstart goes across Canada and they build multi-sport courts. And so this is going to be their first only basketball court only. So there's no other sports. It's just going to be basketball lines. So they came on board with $900,000, and this is going to be the best outdoor basketball court in Canada, in the community that I grew up in. So very fortunate how, again, corporate can really make that impact. And so we wanted to do more than just inspire that next generation. We wanted to make sure that we honored the generations that came before us. So we reached out to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and I presented to their National Survivors Circle and said, I want to, honor you, and how can we do this? And I asked if we could utilize their symbol in terms of the national flag. And so they granted us permission. So at Center Court, we're going to have the National Survivors flag for TRC at Center Court as the logo in honor of the residential school survivors. So when those kids come, they're going to know, the generations that came before them. So it was something that was near and dear to me, one of my passion projects that is going to hopefully, inspire that next generation.
That's amazing. And Pawate Dun is Cree, if I remember. What does it mean?
Yes, Pawate Dun in Cree means let's dream together. So consulted with elders and asking and going back and forth and figuring out something. So those residential school survivors could never dream of something like that in their time. And so for me to have a dream as a child to where I could aspire to, now it's allowing these next generations to dream to whatever they want to aspire to. So for all of us to have these dreams of working together.
It's an amazing story.
Thank you.
And August, if all goes well?
Yeah, so it was supposed to be end of July, but we had a good downpour. I know Calgary's enjoying the sunshine. I told one of the workers that I was bringing the sunshine for today, so that's why it cleared up. No, but yeah, it should be mid-August, but it just got pushed back because of the rain.
Amazing,
Yeah.
amazing. What's it going to be like to, see kids like you the first time you walked onto that brand new court, on this court that you've put so much, blood, sweat, and tears into?
People were asking me, are you excited to play? I said, heck no. I'm excited to sit on that hill and watch people play. So I'm already envisioning it, me sitting on the hill with my little lawn chair, rocking back and forth. I mean, like when I was your age, I used to play.
You call that a layup? Alwyn, Michael talked there about, with no pun intended, jumping through hoops. And, there can be a lot of hoops to jump through when it comes to a project like this, or when it comes to a project like the Indigenous Sports Circle that you helped to start all those years ago. In what ways can projects like this be better streamlined to make them more doable without as many hoops to jump through when, ultimately you've both created programs that, or a soon-to-be court that can have such a huge impact?
We're doing it now. I mean, simply said, we're doing it now. I mean, I think the more that events like this one, and at whatever corporate level, any gathering, and it becomes a way in which for the general public whole just to become engaged, just like we're doing today. I mean, I hate to say it that simply because it's a big issue out there, but we said in a good way, and in Mohawk tradition it's called the good minds, and it's really, that's where it starts, to get rid of those hurdles. You come in, if you come in with your back against the wall, you're not coming from a good mind or a good place. So that's really what I think we're doing here today, and people have been ongoing over the last little while to try to find that answer. And the answer, unfortunately, is probably pretty simple. It's getting an engagement, understanding we're trying to do things together, and finding ways in which to make a system better. And that's really, I hate to say it that way, but it's really, to me, that's how simple it becomes. We set up our own barriers. We do it sometimes as athletes. The biggest barrier sometimes we have is in our mind, because we put it in our heads, I can't get over this hurdle. When honestly, if you really look at it, you can get over that hurdle. You just got to put it in your mind, you're going to go there. And you got to be committed to do that. So to me, the commitment is evolving, and if you're going to have commitment, from my perspective, you can move mountains and stop becoming protective of something and look at it from a sharing perspective.
I want to put this to, well, we'll start with you, Trevor, but Rhonda or Bob, feel free to jump in on it too. You know, we hear about the complexity of this project that Michael's working on. You know, you're taking a piece of land. The city is, and I'm probably not using the correct words here, but you know, giving it to you. You are then working on the project, having to find corporate sponsorship, and then returning it back into city property. I mean, it's a complex thing to pull off. And from a company like Black Diamond Group or Secure Energy or Enbridge, these are companies that are just like experts in logistics. So in what way can you take some of that expertise and try and smooth the path for the likes of programs like these to, you know, beyond just a cash injection, also bringing in some of that expertise of how to navigate something like that and make it happen?
Yeah, I think you touched on it. I mean, anytime that we look at a project, you need to organize it, break it down, to determine what needs to be done and what skill sets you need, whether they're internally or externally, which sounds like what Michael has done. I mean, you work your way through, you find, you know, who has the ability to join in and help solve for or get approval for. I don't know if there's any shortcut. I guess the difference is, you know, that is, as a company, what we do on a regular basis. And so I think it's finding those connections for us, you know, within a framework. It needs to fit in with our corporate approach in terms of how we're engaging with community, how we're building partnership, and where we do find overlap. And I pointed out earlier how quickly we were able to engage around Indigenous sports heroes. A little bit different type of project, but still, the fact that I think the curriculum is in close to 4,000 schools across Canada, and you think about starting from step one with an idea and building the engagement around the stakeholders, the Indigenous sports heroes or Hall of Fame members, to collect their stories, and then find some people who are willing to put some money to it and engage the education community. All of that, very similar, I think, very different type of project. But I think that's how you need to go about it. And then with certain companies, you'll find there's a very strong alignment with their goals, objectives, their connectivity in terms of what they're trying to accomplish in terms of community engagement, our own values, and investing in the people within our company as well. So I think if it's finding alignment, that's part of it. How do you break it down and work your way through coming to realizing, you know, the vision that, in this case, Michael had? I think it's finding those potential partners and bringing them together around a vision. So perhaps it has a lot to do with communication.
And I was at an event recently, and one of the things about gaining support, and I'm glad you dragged him in and dragged her in, but the whole point is bring a friend. Mm-hmm. You know, the corporate community in this country probably all know each other very well. They're competitors, but they know each other. And I was at an event recently, and somebody said that because it just made sense. Bring a friend to the table, and guess what we just created? We just changed the critical mass in which to create change. We all brought someone to the table that was truly interested in reconciliation and being on the same mindset. The critical mass we'd be able to do would be immense. I just want to leave that out there.
Yeah. Alayiah, as a group that, as a representative for the year of a group that is involved in sport in its own way in the Stampede, What have you seen in terms of how, an organization like that can really bring First Nations issues, Indigenous issues, and issues around reconciliation to the fore?
Well, Calgary Stampede, since the beginning of its birth, since 1912, has always included Indigenous people since then. And the first Indigenous person to win the title of Saddle Bronc champion was Tom Three Persons. And so it was because of Guy Weedick. He seen the potential in us Indigenous people in a time where we weren't seen as people. We were encaged in our own fences and taught how to behave, how to dress. We were told to cut our hair, and we had a lot of restrictions during that time. And I learned throughout this entire year that Guy Weedick fought and kind of went against the Canadian government to include us in each year. And I'm very grateful to Guy Weedick, and if he was alive, I would bow down at his feet and probably make him some moccasins of some sort, not Crocs. But I'm sitting here today as the First Nations princess because great leaders such as Tom Three Persons, Evelyn Eagle Speaker, she was one of the first Indigenous person to be the queen for the royalty in those times. Can't remember her year quite yet. But it's people like those, and the people who I'm sitting next to are very great role models for Indigenous people, especially for our youth today. And I hope to live up to those moccasins and kind of, I don't know, it's large shoes, large boots to live in nowadays. But, I wouldn't be able to walk around in my ribbon skirts or my beadwork so proudly without all this recognition and reconciliation. And, I'm very proud and privileged to be a part of Treaty 7 and to have that relationship with the Calgary Stampede, because it's home. It's home where we've built for a long time, and it's, anytime any teepee owners or families go back to the camp each year round, we're always very happy to see one another because we live so far within Treaty 7. And, we're glad to participate in the Calgary Stampede each year. And in 2017, that was the first year for the relay races to be introduced to the Calgary Stampede. And that's been a long-time sport that has always participated throughout the United States. And it's because of people like Logan Red Crow, who was the first female to participate in the relay races at the Calgary Stampede. It's those people who encouraged me to step into my moccasins and out of my boots.
You've been to dozens of events at this point. You've got a lot more to come, and I'm sure you've spoken with other First Nations princesses who preceded you. How is the conversation that you're having with people at all of these events changing compared to what you've heard from previous princesses around reconciliation? What sort of conversations are you having with people, out at events, on the streets with people, as you're, representing Stampede, as you're being part of the, Indigenous heritage of this nation?
I think the common question that I'm always getting is how many pancakes I've eaten, because it is the 100 year for the chuck wagons and pancakes. But anytime I go out into, I meet the public and they ask about my beadwork, who made it, who made my ribbon skirts, I'm always trying to hype up the Indigenous creators, ambassadors, and entrepreneurs, because most of my things are not made by me, but some of them are. So, my earrings are from the past princess, Savannah Sparvier, who's actually my best friend. So I'm very honored to have her as my best friend and adoptive sister. And, just little fun facts I get to have with the community and tell them that elk, for us Blackfoot people, we have elk teeth. I don't have any on right now, but anytime you see elk teeth on an outfit or regalia, it means that they're rich, they have their Gucci on, or they're very bougie. I don't know how else to say it. But because elk only have 2 teeth, which I learned a while ago when I was in Crow Agency for a powwow. And those are the fun facts that I get to learn, as well as teach other people who I meet. So every single day it's a learning lesson for myself and those who I come encounter with, because there's so much beauty and creation to our beadwork and the way we dance and the stories behind each category. Like a little fun fact is that the purse that I have on has geometrical designs, and what I was taught is the geometrical designs are to replicate the Rocky Mountains that we're surrounded by. And so anytime you see the geometrical design on a Indigenous regalia, it usually means that they're very close to the Rocky Mountains. Yeah.
Very cool. We're pretty much out of time here, but Michael and Alwyn, I wanted to come back to you and just talk about Alwyn, you were such an important role model for Indigenous athletes in this country, and we talked about some of the examples of athletes who've come up after you really helped lead the way. What do you think of the state of Indigenous athleticism, Indigenous athletes in the country at this point?
Oh, you know what? I would say that, as I said probably earlier today and probably said it 100 times, there are incredible athletes out there. And I think they're still there. The question we have to try to reconcile with is, how do we get them to find their way into the mainstream sports system without compromising where they're coming from a cultural standpoint? They're there. And I say it again and again. I kid you not. They're there. I mean, we had Zach Whitecloud, and we had Brandon Montour. We had Brian Trottier. Guess what? They're out there. And like I said, we just need to find a way in which to create the right kind of environment to make them feel comfortable in a new environment that is at a performance level at the top of this world. And I mean, at this point, I think if Canada can celebrate the fact that Indigenous people are standing on the podium or having their names on the Stanley Cup from a Canadian team,
eventually
would be absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Michael, your thoughts on where Indigenous athleticism is at this point, and how what we have to work on still?
For Olympians, there's something called Own the Podium, and it's where there's an injection of funds to support athletes that have an opportunity to actually medal. We need something similar, because there is an Indigenous pathway for sport, which runs alongside the regular pathway for athletes. There is a significant amount more of hurdles on the Indigenous pathway. So if there's an opportunity with corporate as well as government to be able to create something similar to an Own the Podium, where we can support those elite athletes who need that extra support in terms of getting through some of those hurdles to be able to get to that next level. Because, as mentioned, there are Olympic level athletes. There are Olympic caliber athletes. Like, generationally, since time immemorial, we have not only an athletic, a warrior spirit within us. And that spirit needs to be awakened in some of our people. And so when we have the opportunity to continue to support them, we're accomplishing things at the highest level. Like, this is, the greatest athlete of his time, the best in the world. He's sitting right here in the room. So when we have the opportunity to provide those supports, we can replicate that, and we can have more Indigenous athletes at the highest level. Please look up Tong Longboat if you haven't had an opportunity. Phenomenal story, and just what he was able to do in his time as well. So yeah, so again, thank you guys all for being here. That's not closing, that's just me expressing my gratitude once again.
Well, it is essentially closing. It's been a real pleasure talking with the six of you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear a round of applause, folks. Alwyn Morris, Michael Linklater, Alayiah Wolfchild, Rhonda Rudnitski, Trevor Haynes, and Bob Rooney. I'm Paul Karchut from CBC. If you're the part of this will play this weekend on my show, by the way. So if you're tuning in over the weekend, you might hear some of this panel. And let's turn things back over to James Lavallee, who's been the master of ceremonies today. James.
Right on. Thanks, Paul. Thanks to our panelists. I'm James Lavallee, and I have the pleasure of introducing the CEO of the Calgary Public Library, Sarah Mueller, for some closing remarks.
Let me just lower this. Oki, Ambawastich, Dani Dada, Tanshe, welcome. I'm Sarah Mueller, and I'm fortunate enough to be the CEO of the Calgary Public Library, which includes this amazing building. And it's been just such a pleasure having all of you here today. On behalf of the library, I'd like to in particular thank these panelists who Paul named: Alwyn Morris, Alayiah Wolfchild, Michael Linklater, Rhonda Rudnitski, Trevor Haynes, and Bob Rooney for sharing their experiences, their insights, as well as our fantastic moderator, Paul. I have left this conversation that I got to listen to from the hallway with ideas for how we can move this journey of truth and reconciliation forward. We can bring a friend, we can celebrate Indigenous athletes, and we all can go to the Stampede, which we should. Those are small things that we can do, but there is a lot more ahead of us, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants who have already led the way. Calgary Public Library is so thrilled to be hosting this day today because we've committed to listening to, learning from, and building relationships with all the local Indigenous communities here. Indigenous programming and resources are a year-round priority at Calgary Public Library, but June, and today in particular, has been amazing. If you've wandered through the building, you've seen all the students that are engaging in so many activities, so much learning, and it's just been incredible. The library is honored to host panels like the one today because for us, part of our programming is where Indigenous community members can see themselves and their cultures reflected at the library, in our programming, in our exhibits, and in our spaces. And it's important that as a learning institution, we provide a place where everyone can learn and further their own journey of truth and reconciliation. Thank you to all of you for being here today for this important conversation on National Indigenous Peoples Day. I also want to say how grateful we are to the many partners that we work with, including the Canada's Sports Hall of Fame and CBC Calgary, for their help in making events like today possible. I know that it is through increased intercultural awareness and empathy that Calgary Public Library can help and continue to be a thoughtful collaborator, developer, and supporter of programs, collections, and spaces in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. There's lots more events planned for National Indigenous History Month, so I hope to see you at some of them and see you at the library soon. Thank you for being here today, and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude, a big Chimigwich thank you for our amazing keynote speaker earlier today, Alwyn, and Hall of Famer, Alwyn Morris, and to our, big round of applause. Totally fangirling right now, but that's another thing. And our great panelists. We had Alwyn Morris, Bob Rooney, Trevor Haynes, I hope I said that right, Rhonda Rudnitski, Alayiah Wolfchild, and Michael Linklater. And so thank you for sharing your incredible contributions on the road to truth and reconciliation in sport. A very big thank you to the planning committee that made this happen, the Calgary Public Library, and some incredible sponsors, which is Secure Energy, Black Diamond Group, and the Government of Canada. So thank you all for joining us on our second annual National Indigenous People Day event. But there's one last thing we got to do. So I'd like to invite Becky Morgan from the Canada Sports Hall of Fame to provide the name of the winner of today's giveaway. Thank you so much. Renessa Walker? Yeah, we got Renessa Walker. Is Renessa Walker here? Yeah, come on down and get your giveaway. Right on. And so, if I'm not mistaken, I think that concludes our amazing day today. And I want to thank everyone here for coming out and being a part of reconciliation and championing that and all the things that you do. Miigwech, Marcy. Goodbye.